Every few years, the story of baseball's past meets the judgment of its present. The 2026 Contemporary Era Committee has once again convened, assembling a 16-member panel of Hall of Famers, longtime executives, veteran baseball writers, and respected historians. Each panelist holds the power to cast a maximum of 3 votes, shaping which figures from the modern game may take their rightful place in Cooperstown. It's one of the most scrutinized and debated steps in the Hall of Fame process, one where legacies are re-examined, narratives are challenged, and the baseball world waits to see whose contributions stand the test of time. And today, the Baseball Banter Broadcast joins in that illustrious conversation. In this video, our team breaks down the candidates, examines their cases, and ultimately make our own selections, unofficially, of course, choosing who we believe deserves induction through the Contemporary Era Ballot. So buckle in, baseball fans. It's time to revisit history, reconsider greatness, and cast our votes. This is the Baseball Banter Broadcast 2026 Contemporary Era Ballot Special. So let's begin. What is going on, baseball fans? As you heard in the open, today we have the honor and the privilege to discuss the 8-man Contemporary Era Ballot and our votes ultimately on who we believe should get in. Now, obviously, if you're new to the scene and don't understand exactly what is happening, there is a 16-man panel that will be voting on 8 specific players and their potential induction into the MLB Hall of Fame. The 8 players are as follows: Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Carlos Delgado, Jeff Kent, Don Mattingly, Dale Murphy, Gary Sheffield, and Fernando Valenzuela. Now, as we go through this exercise tonight, we encourage you to make up your own ballot. Now, you have to follow the same rules that we did, which is exactly what the committee does. You get a maximum of 3 votes. So down in the comments, make sure you comment your 3-man vote for your Contemporary Era Ballot. But to join me tonight on this honorous video, we have Coach Ken Anderson and, of course, Roman Rodriguez. Thank you guys for joining me on this.
Good to be here.
I'm just glad that it'll finally get in on the 15th try to the show. You know, I'm glad that I got at least 33% of the vote here. So that's awesome.
Absolutely, Rome. Absolutely. So we have not discussed our list with one another heading into this program. So it will be news to each and every one of us as far as who we're selecting wholeheartedly with this pick. But before we get into our selections and kind of debate the ballot itself, is there something that you guys believe that should be changed about the process, whether it be through the BBWAA and the writer's ballot and or the committee ballots?
Go ahead, Roman.
I would say a crystal criteria in terms of what exactly makes a Hall of Famer, because just when you think about who's in the Hall of Fame, there's over 360 players who are in the Hall of Fame. That's not even, it's barely a percentage. 30,000 plus players have played in the Major League Baseball since 1876 or whatever it is. And from that time period, 30,000 players have worn the uniforms, have been Major League players, and we only got a percentage. That's fine. I am all for small hall. I'm all for the elite of the elite there. However, in terms of what is the criteria, why is one guy in and one guy isn't? As we continue to talk, there's going to be some research that I've been doing where I've divided the players into decades. 80s, so 1980s to 1989, who was the top in the categories of hits, average, on base percentage, so on and so forth. Really figuring out who was strong. I unfortunately don't feel that we have any sort of methodology like that. It almost seems like one guy's problems is more amplified for a certain player A, and it's overlooked for player B. A guy who was very gutsy in the 70s was put into the Hall of Fame, but the same type of player is overlooked and overshadowed in the 90s. And to me, that doesn't make sense. We really need to have a surefire way because, and I'm sorry going on a rant, Coach, I'll shut up in a second, but we need to have a surefire way to acknowledge these guys, so therefore it's not arguable. This is why he's in. That makes sense. Unfortunately, when looking at some of the guys who are enshrined, it looks like more of a team's Hall of Fame is blended into the National Baseball Hall of Fame at some times, because some of these guys, they're not elite. Unfortunately, they're great dudes. They've done a lot of great things. I think they need to go different ways about it. Maybe have a section of baseball where it's like guys who are like mascots of the game. So therefore, guys who are good personalities, have them be in their own hall. I do think that we need to go for a performance enhancement section called the David Ortiz wing of the Hall of Fame, allegedly. I think that way, hey, yeah, go ahead. Ken Caminiti, you're in. Jose Canseco, you're in. Everybody's in. Go ahead, fine. And I think if you take it that way, I think that would be more appropriate to what the Hall of Fame should be. So that's my rant. I'm sorry about that, Coach. It's just researching. I got really passionate about it. So, and my next door neighbor pretty much has a restraining order because he doesn't want to talk to me anymore. It's like, you know what, Roman, just go to your podcast. Go. Coach,
Well, I'll piggyback a little bit. I do think it needs to be a crystal clear process. The problem is how do you make it crystal clear? I think how to do that is, and we've discussed this before on the broadcast, is you've got to incorporate more different mind processes, the game a different way. So when it's just the writers that are voting, or just this voting, I think it should be a compilation of different parties, including players from each generation, a panel that has two players that are alive from the 60s to the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 10s, and now. Have a panel that looks at the game, they get in the room, they talk, and they vote. Also have the writer's vote is fine. Also have a front office vote where you put a panel of front office because, we say this player A is worth this money, this player B is worth this money. Well, technically, whatever the front office is, for instance, down in Atlanta right now, everybody will argue that Ronald Acuna and maybe Matt Olson are our best players. Yet the Braves front office says Austin Riley is because they pay him the most money. So have that group and have a percentage laid to each one that votes in the process, and I think you then get more of a true identity because you're getting different eyes in the way they look at the games. So you have an analytics look, you have a fan look, you have a front office look, you have a player's look. In between that, you'll get a crystal clear of the Hall of Fame. I don't want the Hall of Fame to get bigger. I don't want it to have wings. Either you're a Hall of Famer or not Hall of Fame. Now, if you want to create a whole different museum for ball players who were great, that is called Team Hall of Fames, and every team has one. And for us, we have numbers plastered. Yankees have the most plastered. They have the greatest organization in the game. And, but we have a lot of numbers played. We've had great players. And so we have ours up there too. And we keep adding because we've had a great organization. And that's what the Team Hall of Fame's for. The Major League Baseball Hall of Fame should be the best players of the best players. The teams will tell you who the best players are because they put them in their Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
The Major League Baseball needs to take that list and then say, okay, who's the best of that group? And I think you get the extra eyes, you'll find that. So, for instance, I have no problem with Harold Baines being in the White Sox Hall of Fame. He was a great White Sox player. I don't necessarily think he should be in the National Hall of Fame. Jim Rice, Red Sox great. Doesn't mean. So, like in the Braves instance, we had great players that played for the Braves. They're not National Hall of Fame players. So I understand that as a Braves fan. So I think if they had a process where you could break it all down like that, and some from all the generations, I think you could have more of a crystal clear to say, okay, that's who our best for the best is. That's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and I think that's where this committee comes in, right? Because we know that the committee is made up of, Hall of Fame players, of executives, of, national baseball writers and historians. So that panel is exactly what you're speaking about, Ken. And so I think that it's interesting, when we look back, and you mentioned two of the players that I was going to name in some of my arguments here, in Harold Baines and Jim Rice, as great a player as they were, did they capture the moment? Did they capture the essence of when you look at this ball player, you knew this is a Hall of Famer. When you looked at Ken Griffey Jr., you knew this is a Hall of Famer, watching him play day in and day out. You don't necessarily always get that feeling with some of the guys that get voted in. And some of the players that have been left out, as we can see on this ballot, should have maybe gotten more consideration in that aspect. One player that I have always, championed the case for that finally got in on one of these committee ballots was Fred McGriff. Fred McGriff to me was undoubtedly a Hall of Famer without any sort of, PED suspicion. Like, he was the player, in my opinion, that was most hurt by the PED era, because 493 home runs was a highlight mark until you had people that were juiced to the gills hitting and surpassing those numbers, right? So, and not only that, McGriff went through 2 different strikes that cost him opportunities where those 7 home runs could have easily, been hit and put him over that 500 home run mark, which was a clear benchmark plateau. So, seeing these committees kind of get put together, I do think that it helps to kind of paint that picture a little bit more clearly, as you said, Ken, with having those different, voices in the room that maybe you don't necessarily get with the writer's ballot. So as we get started here, I'd like to get our first candidate from each and every one of us on this ballot. So who'd like to go first?
All right. The representative from Tampa would like to say his first selection of the three, and I'll just go ahead and we'll pop this cork. Mr. Dale Murphy. Mr. Dale Murphy, I feel is going to be a Hall of Famer. Did you want me to give the reasons as to why he's in my selection?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I highlighted this earlier on my monologue, if you will. If you take a look at Dale Murphy, if you take a look at the stats from 1980 to 1989, okay, all right, that's an era, okay. If you look at stat after stat, he's in the top 10. He's in the top 10 for hits. He's in the top 10 for average. He's in the top 10 for slugging. He's continually in the top 10 there. And guys who are also in with him are already in the Hall of Fame. Guys who are below him are already in the Hall of Fame. So to me, that's a tragedy. When you are in that elite company and you're not on that same table. And if you take a look as to why, I feel, unfortunately, he was caught in that tailspin, and the reason why he was lost is, number one, he was playing, no offense, on some bad Braves teams that didn't get the publicity and didn't get the pub, even though TBS really did give him a lot of good shine for a long time. He ended on a sour note with the Rockies. Now, a lot of people remember that. A forgotten member of the Rockies, if you will. And then on top of that, his career started to do a tailspin, unlike with players that we're used to. After 35, suddenly have this sudden boost, and they have ungodly stats until they're 42, 43. That wasn't Dale Murphy. That wasn't Fred McGriff. You know, to me, he was a leader of the 80s. When you're talking about the top 10 hitters of 1980s, an era, elite, you have to have that conversation starting somewhere with Dale Murphy.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, and he also is, he played on not bad teams, he played on horrible teams. And on one of our last episodes, we talked about the AL MVP, and you also me on Judge because his lineup was definitely weaker. And it's harder to put up numbers when your lineup is weaker. And the Braves lineup was horrible. And he put up those numbers, and he was tremendous. So I think you're spot on with your Roman. I think he is a case. He is also one of the greatest players in an era, which is a decade. He was one of the top players, and I think you have to be that also to be in the National Hall of Fame. So I have no problem with Murphy if he gets in.
Absolutely. So for those that may not know, Dale Murphy was a 2-time MVP, 7-time All-Star, 5-time Gold Glove winner, 4-time Silver Slugger winner, and a recipient of the Roberto Clemente Award. So definitely, when you have those kind of accolades attached to your name, there's without a doubt a very legitimate case for the Hall of Fame. Can you want to go with yours?
Yeah, I'm going to jump on a Yankee. I think Don Mattingly deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm a coach. So I like guys who are coaches on the field, and Don Mattingly is a coach on the field. He also had tremendous numbers. Now, look, arguably he played first base. Her numbers are inflated, and they don't match some of the first base that are in the Hall of Fame. But my argument for him is we do have winners in the Hall of Fame. We have guys who are in the Hall of Fame because they won, not because they're numbers. So if you're going to put guys like that in the Hall of Fame, then Don Mattingly deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He was a Gold Glove first baseman. He was the captain of some really good teams. And I argued that if Don Mattingly could have won a World Series, he'd already be in the Hall of Fame. And I don't know why you get penalized. I think Murphy is another case, got penalized because his team didn't win the championship. And, here in Atlanta, not to bring another sport too much into it, I'm not a Falcons fan myself. I root for a team outside of Atlanta, but I know a lot of Falcons fans with Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan probably put up the numbers to be in the Hall of Fame, and him losing a Super Bowl, he had 28-3, he may not get in. And I've never understood why you're getting penalized in a team sport because the other team beats you. And I think that's what's happened to Don Mattingly. Don Mattingly was a great player. He hit for average. He hit home runs, and he was very, very, very good in clutch situations. He was one of the best clutch hitters we've ever seen. And again, he's a Gold Glove first baseman. And anybody who can go to the stands and get popcorn out of a bag while the kid's watching for the foul ball also gets an added point for me. But as a coach, I think winners need to be in the Hall of Fame, and I think there should be a precedent of that. And he was a winner. The Yankees just didn't have the teams at the time for him to win world championships. But I really do believe if he had a world championship, I believe Don Mattingly would have been in the Hall of Fame. And so I make a case for him to be voted.
Absolutely. Donnie Baseball, former MVP, 6-time All-Star, 9-time Gold Glove winner, 3-time Silver Slugger, and a batting champion. Not to mention having 6 Grand Slams hit in one single season. All 6 Grand Slams of his career were hit in one single season. So a little tip here on Donnie Baseball. Now, as I make my case for my first player, it's a controversial one to some people, but to me, Barry Bonds deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I think that when you look at Bonds, and even if you discount what he did, from, let's say, 2000 on, This is still the only player in Major League Baseball history with over 500 home runs, over 500 steals. This is a 7-time MVP, 14-time All-Star, Home Run Derby champ, 8-time Gold Glove winner, 12-time Silver Slugger, 2-time batting champion. I mean, there isn't a thing that Barry Bonds, outside of maybe a weaker throwing arm, that he wasn't capable of doing. This was a guy who, you know, even if you discount the steroid part of it, right, the rumored PD usage, we know that there's guys in the Hall right now that have used. We know that they've been, you know, PD users that are in the Hall of Fame. A couple years ago, when Bonds and Clemens, amongst others, were not voted in on the writers' ballot, you know, I put together a video and kind of discussing it. We know that guys like Pudge Rodriguez, you know, Mike Piazza, David Ortiz, constantly overlooked at the fact that his name was included in that Mitchell report. Yeah. That these guys weren't half the player that Barry Bonds was, and because Bonds was disliked by the writers because of, you know, the way he was very standoffish at the time, he was left out. And I think, you know, obviously being one of the poster boys, if you will, for the steroid era, he was looked at as the guy that they're going to hold out of the Hall, regardless of the fact that he was deserving. So to me, Barry Bonds is without a doubt a Hall of Famer and should have long been in the Hall.
He was one of the greatest players I've ever seen play live. And, you know, he's the most controversial of the whole group because, and I'm telling my best friend today that the problem with him is he didn't have to do it. He only did it because he was trying to stay on the ball field. Yeah. And that makes it rough, because if he would have done it, he would have went right into the Hall of Fame. So yeah, definitely a case for him, and I think he should definitely be included in the vote here with the other 7 members. But I will say, if he doesn't get voted in, we definitely know the reason for him, and then that becomes a debate amongst everybody else about the baseball fans on whether that's right or wrong. But as far as being in this vote, in this committee, us talking about it, he's definitely has put up the numbers to be here with one of the 8, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when it comes to Barry Bonds, spoiler alert, he didn't make my 3. And the reason being is, to be very honest with you, it had more to do with the character aspect of the Hall of Fame. And that's the only reason. And what I mean by that is the way he was so brash about the scrutiny of him doing steroids or supposedly doing steroids. The air around him, and this goes to Coach's point on the controversy, one of his trainers went to jail for him because he didn't want to testify. So to me, and the same thing with Roger Clemens, not to steal anyone's thunder, but it reminds me very much of gangsters. Like when you look at Al Capone, you can't get anything to stick on him, but you pretty much know what's going on, but you can't prove it. But you're so very close. That's when you start to get people who are so close to the truth. That's when people start to perjure themselves and do things illegal because they just want to get that edge and go, you know, hey, in order to get a bad guy, we got to do some bad things. And you kind of see that same cycle when it comes to Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, unfortunately. Same thing that you see with gangsters back in the 30s and 40s, where people were overlooking certain facts or maybe putting a gray area there just to get quote unquote justice. So Barry Bonds, you know, I'm a kid of the 80s, like Jeremy, and Coach, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I don't think you're a kid of the 80s, sir. No offense. But you know, so Barry Bonds to me was, you know, he was awesome. You know, him in the Pirates, that 90s Pirates team was amazing.
Depends on what the age of a kid is, by the way. I don't know what the age of a kid is, but I graduated in high school in at 84 and played at Georgia Tech between 84 and 87. So I don't know. I felt like I was a kid, but maybe I was.
I apologize, Coach. You're absolutely correct. But anywho, to digress. So when it comes to that type of material, I mean, I want so bad to say Barry Bonds is 100% in the Hall of Fame. I want to say that. I can't. And the reason why I can't is because of the shroud and the cloud that would have around the Hall of Fame. Yes, there are already guys that are already there, and that's bad enough. And it's a situation. And for the guys, you know, with steroids, I'm starting to lean towards the Pete Rose role, where Pete Rose, one of the reasons why he stayed at the Hall of Fame, not only did he gamble, but he didn't own up to what he was doing. And he was, no, I didn't do anything. Then finally, 25 years later, he finally said in a book that, yeah, here's what happened. So I think that we should hold everyone to the same standard that we held Pete Rose to. Now, in defense of Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, they didn't technically do anything wrong. So multiple times they've been tried, and they've come out of those court cases, granted a little bit scathed, but clean. No pun intended. And one of the guys who were up for ballots literally said that the reason why he failed a drug test is because he got stuff from Barry Bonds. So there you go. It's one of those things where it's, yeah, I feel like I'm watching Untouchables, if you will. When this is what's frustrating about this part of our generation of baseball is we're going to start having these conversations. Were they clean? Were they not?
Well, I think
I
I disagree there, Rum. We've had that
Okay.
for the history of baseball because they always want to know if the pitcher loaded up more than this pitcher. They wanted to know if they would get signs in the 50s was given. You know, they always thought Mickey Mantle was able to give pitchers that the catchers liked Mickey so much they tell them what was coming. You never know if some things are true or not. So there's always controversy around everything. I will say this here. I'll go ahead and do my number 5 for my number 2. I first of all, I'm going to tell you the 3 I vote for. You might already pick my 2. So I'm the old coach, so I'm going to fight for names I don't hear. So since you threw him under the bus, I'm going to talk about Roger Clemens. Roger Clemens deserves to be in the Hall of Fame for one reason. He was the most dominant pitcher of his era. And when you're the most dominant player, and I'm going to tell you something, we're talking about 20-something young, skinny Roger Clemens who threw the 20 strikeout. He wasn't using stuff then. Roger Clemens was unhittable. And anybody who says Roger Clemens wasn't one of the best pitchers of baseball, we take them off the podcast. They're never allowed to talk baseball ever again. Roger Clemens is one of the greatest players to ever play. Now, Brian McCann, who I hold very dear to me because he's a Brave and just a really good Georgia dude. I've known Brian. I guess I am a Roman. I've known Brian since his high school days, playing in high school, and saw him play and everything. Yeah. But Brian McCann, I go to players sometimes, and Brian McCann will fight for Roger Clemens. Okay, and I understand when you're juicing up, and I never saw Roger Clemens throw 104-mile-an-hour fastball. You know, so whatever he might have been doing, he still had the pitch ability to me. Mm-hmm. And this is where, like you said, Roman, we're getting a lot of different arguments here because, you know, you can argue this one side and argue the other side. But to me, if we're not going to put our best players in the Hall of Fame of their era, because we can't control the era. So, for instance, Frank Home Run Baker was a great home run hitter in his era. Until Babe Ruth comes along, nobody knew anybody could hit home runs like that. But so we can't penalize him because he only hit this many home runs. He hit an era the ball was dead. Or the fact that we had guys in the 50s hitting in ballparks that had 450-foot center fields. You know, they wouldn't.
They also had 230 feet down the line.
Exactly. So we don't know where the home runs really come from. I don't think anybody's gone back and watched every film to know where those home runs were hit. They just assume and they make the argument for one side or the other. Okay. So you have to look at the greatest players of a generation. That's what these committees has to do. And Roger Clemens, the argument is he was the greatest pitcher of his era. He also won world championships, and every team he was on won because as an ace, he took the mound every 5 days, sometimes every 4 days, and he gave them 7 innings or more almost every game. Teams couldn't hit him, and they won, and that's why Roger Clemens deserves to be in this Hall of Fame.
And Coach, I 100% agree with you in terms of the player. And same thing, I love Roger Clemens. I was born in Austin, Texas. So any guy who wore a Texas Longhorn uniform, I thought were gods pretty much until I was about 12. I loved everything that he was doing. Jeremy can relate to this. He appeared in The Simpsons, which was a big thing, you know, as one of my guys who I'm going to nominate. Well, you already mentioned him, but you know, he appeared in The Simpsons, so it was a big deal to me. And I really, you know, I want to pull that lever for him so bad, but to me, it's just a situation where it's like, you're great, you're absolutely great, but Jose Canseco made a point in his book, for better or worse, but he said that he never saw Roger took steroids, but if you just look at the plateau, where he was struggling in Boston, he went to Toronto, and then suddenly shot back up. And say what you will about Jose Canseco, I'm not treating him like gospel, it's just he has an interesting perspective, for better or worse. So, and you know, and Roger even said, you know, hey, look, he got plenty of time with that ankle monitor to write that book. You know, that was his response to him being named in the book. And, but, you know, Roger, 100%. When doing research, when you take a look at the 80s for pitching, he's there in the top 3 for pitchers. You name the category, games, strikeouts, ERA, WHIP. He's there. When you go to the 90s, he's in the top 5. When you go into the 2000s, he's in the top 10. Okay. We got guys who are just good in one era. He's great in 3.
Yep.
The only other guy that in recent memory who has similarity trajectory to that is some guy named Nolan Ryan. So to me, when you're in that upper echelon, when you're in that elite level, 100%, but in terms of, so now you're looking at, okay, so he's shoulder to shoulder with Nolan. I have a feeling if I was at Nolan, he would probably say, yeah, sure. You know, he was a good kid, you know, so on and so forth. I don't know nothing about nothing, but he was a good kid. But at the end of the day, to hold him to that same plateau and similarity to Nolan Ryan, I'm sorry. I feel that he made decisions, and for better or worse, you made the bed that you lied in, and you associated, for better or worse, no one forced him to have this controversy on his shoulders. He could have said, hey, look, I'm going to take every test, so on and so forth, I'm clean. But he continued to be brash with the way he went about it. Other people got pegged. Other people, for Pete's sake, he threw Andy Pettit under the bus. He goes, oh, he misremembered. It's like, come on. If we remember the hearing, the Senate hearing where they had him under, and they're quoting Andy Pettit, and Roger Clemens, to paraphrase, said, I think Andy misremembered. That's a brazen thing to say about your quote-unquote friend, your teammate, who followed you to Houston. For better or
Well, I don't
worse.
know if it's abrasive. Misremembered is kind of a nice way of saying he's lying. So he actually, because he was his friend, if he wouldn't have been his friend, he would have said he's lying. But I understand what you're saying. The point's good. He's very controversial. And I think both of those went to Houston and pitched well.
Oh,
You know,
100%.
so I understand the Jose Canseco, but no offense to, I know he was a Ray. I know you like to maybe protect him, but the ball may hit him in the head too much in Boston. I don't really care about 2 cents about what Jose Canseco has to say about anything about the game of baseball, and that's just from a coach's perspective. But I think Jose Canseco is a clown, and I wouldn't want him on my ball team. And he's a cancer, and I think that part of the reason the Dodgers of '88 have a World Series is because he is a cancer. He's not a winner. He's a me guy. And a guy named Oral Hershiser went out there and he cost Dave Stewart another world championship because Dave Stewart was a great pitcher. And I think that, he shows what kind of person he is because he's always able to go out and name and throw people under the bus. And I don't really trust people that's always got some way to throw under the bus. So if anybody watching this broadcast that wants to throw Roman under the bus and Jeremy under the bus, I'm probably not going to listen to them anymore. Because they don't know the person, and they're just maybe a little jealously too. And that's how I look at Jose. But you make good points. There's a lot of controversy. So if you're going to put Bonds in, how do you put Clemens in? How do you put Clemens in? How do you put Bonds in? They kind of link together. They're both talent-wise Hall of Famers. So I see the argument against him as well.
Well, and what it's doing is it's opening up the floodgate, and that gate is already opened a bit because the aforementioned guys who are already in the hall, who have some sort of shroud against them, a cloud against them. But here's the thing: those guys have decent characters, or they're good representatives of the game, quote unquote. You don't hear anybody hushing, go, it's on the Mitchell report, or he did this. You don't hear that. So when you take a look at letting these guys in, then it becomes a simple situation of, well, A-Rod should be in because Bonds is in. Well, Manny Ramirez should be in.
Right. So here's the difference for me, right? And just to kind of give my second vote here because Coach already talked about it, but Roger Clemens was my number 2, right?
Okay.
And that's that Bonds and Clemens, they're linked, right? But the thing that separates Bonds and Clemens from A-Rod, who I'll be very clear and have said it repeatedly, A-Rod was my favorite player growing up, but I cannot vote for Alex as much as I would love to vote for him as a Hall of Fame player because he failed a test, and he didn't fail; he was suspended for the steroids, right? So if you failed a test after testing was put into play in 2004, or you were suspended for PEDs, that to me is what nullifies you, and that's where the floodgate wouldn't then be open because of Bonds and Clemens, because they did not ever fail a test, and both players played after testing was installed in 2004. So neither one failed, and I'm sure they were tested like crazy at that point because especially Bonds, obviously in my opinion was blackballed out of baseball in 2007 when his contract with the Giants was up at that point, and very easily could have continued going. But both of those guys played after testing was installed. Neither one failed a test. Neither one was even rumored to have failed a test after testing was put into play. So for me to hold these two guys out, who were the best of their generation, in my opinion, on the offensive side and on the pitching side, right? Because Roger Clemens was an MVP as a pitcher, a 7-time Cy Young Award winner, 2-time Triple Crown winner as a pitcher, 11-time All-Star, 2-time World Series champion, 7-time ERA champion, and an All-Star MVP. There's no doubt about it. These two players at their respective positions can easily go down with a very short argument, in my opinion, as the best of all time at their spots. When you hold out talent at this elite level because they were not liked, because they were, assumed and probably rightfully so assumed to be using steroids, but never failed a test, you're now punishing them for something that prior to 2004 was something that was an absolute free-for-all. It's been, something that has it's been controversial since it started, but you have guys that are already in. The other thing for me about it too is that when you think about the fact that these two guys, right, even if you take out the latter 5-7 years of their career, they're still Hall of Famers. And to me, that's where it's like, how can you truly say that you have the best of the best in the Hall of Fame if these two guys aren't in? And just to kind of piggyback on your character point, Roman, nobody has ever accused Ty Cobb of being a nice guy. So if Ty Cobb is in the Hall of Fame, then there's absolutely no reason that Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens shouldn't be.
You're absolutely correct. But Barry Bonds was a questionable character before the steroids. So he was very questionable. He had a lot of issues on his character. He was very brash, and that's fine. No problems. You like the player, you'll take some headaches. That's great. But on top of that, so he was brash before. On top of that, now you have a guy who has a lot of controversy, and he still has short answers, very facetious answers, very so on and so forth, and just very abrasive with information, things to that accordance. Same thing with Roger Clemens. He wasn't cocky because he was confident. He knew he could get you out. He had an air of confidence to him. And so you combine that with the uncertainty, that just makes somebody, to me, and it's just my personal opinion. It's just my personal opinion. I think it goes back to like being a ball player. I'll play with the 33rd worst or best guy on the team, and I'll leave the 12th best guy out if the 33rd has a good heart, who won't throw you guys under the bus. And to me, it's just too many questions come about. But again, that's just opinion. And the thing that I like about this exercise is these are real conversations that the room's having.
Yes.
But I think also that you're saying why the writers didn't vote him in. You're saying things why writers said he's abrasive, he's whatever. That should have nothing to do with talent when it comes to, no offense, to higher level. When I coached and played, you said pick the 33rd. Well, I played. I wouldn't want a coach to put, if I wasn't the best player, I don't care how much of a jerk the guy ahead of me was. If he was better than me, I expected him to play. And in an argument of Clemens and Bonds being different, I'll tell you what it is. Mm-hmm. Other pitchers, now we don't really know hitters. We can guess. We can possibly assume some of the hitters cheated. Sure. Yeah. But we do know of pitchers who we do know cheated, loaded the ball up, marked the ball, 100%. They're in the Hall of Fame. 100%. Okay. They're equal to Clemens. They're equal. Now, look, I said I wouldn't tell you which ones I voted for, but I'll go ahead and let you know. One of the three I would vote for would be Roger Clemens, because there's you can line them up against the Gaylord Perrys, against these guys who we know cheated. You're not supposed to do what they did, and they're in the Hall of Fame. And Roger Clemens, we think, might have cheated. And just because he's being a jerk on a committee, and I'd be honest with you, I'd probably be a big jerk to the Senate committee anyhow. I'm a big politics, bring politics into this. But the fact of the matter is I don't think that has to keep him out of the Hall of Fame. And to him, you're lining up position by position in the Hall of Fame. I just told you about with Mattingly. It's a harder fight for Don. For me, I nominate him because I love Don Mattingly as a player. But you line him up against other first basemen, you can see the difference why people may vote, because they see these great first basemen, the Jimmy Fox, all this other. But the fact of the matter is, Lou Gehrig, is you line up Clemens against all these pitchers, even the ones that cheated. He's better than they are. You can't keep Clemens out of the Hall of Fame. And I'm going to tell you right now, for 100%, he'd be the first name I'd write across that line would be Roger Clemens. And I will tell you right now, I would not vote for Barry Bonds. That's just how I look at the game. But when Jeremy gives the argument, if he got in the Hall of Fame, I can understand. This is back to that argument we had before with Raleigh and Gus. You can make an argument either way, but you can't be mad. If Bonds gets in the Hall of Fame, you can understand why he gets in the Hall of Fame. He wins one of them, this committee. You can understand they voted on talent and talent alone. He should be in the Hall of Fame. I have three other guys that I think should be in the Hall of Fame. We only get 3 votes. And we ain't got to my guy that I know is not going to get in there, and I think he should be in. And my right now would be Clemens, and Roman, you brought up number 2, I would have Dale Murphy. And we'll wait for my number 3 to later and let y'all talk.
So, Ron, who's your number 2? Because we've gotten to coaches now, top 2, but not yours.
Well, I'll just go ahead and give you my number 3 to number 2, because number 2 would have been Don Mattingly. Now, when it comes down and how I pick my guys is, and we talked about this, and I'm going to just repeat what I've said before. I took the decades that the guy was prevalent in. And if you take a look at it, again, Don Mattingly, now granted, he's not in the top 5, he's not in the top 3, but he's in the top 10. He's number 8, he's number 9, so on and so forth. And we're talking hits, we're talking on base percentage, we're talking slugging. He's continuing in that. Now, part of my thought process that I take away, and eventually you're going to see some things that I'm going to commit to for this page, is I'm going to highlight guys that possibly should have another argument for the Hall of Fame. I'm starting from 1960s on, guys like Tug McGraw and things like that, just for a heads up. And what I'm doing is I'm just taking purely the stats, not the fact that they won a Gold Glove, not the fact that they won an MVP, not the All-Stars, and not even the postseason, just their production. The reason being is because it takes away that favoritism that other markets may have provided, because there's some really good ball players that aren't in the Hall of Fame, one of the reasons is because they played on really poor teams, and they're really, really good. And you can only wonder what would transpire if they were on a better squad or in a bigger market. And there's guys who were deserving of a Silver Slugger who didn't get it because they didn't have the notoriety. Same thing with MVP votes. We could go down this all the time. All-Stars. Guys get All-Stars sometimes just because of the uniform that they wear, for better or worse, and not necessarily because of where they're at. Toby Hall, for example, was one of the best catchers for about 2 to 3 years. He was a top 3 catcher defensively, hitting 280s. He never made an All-Star team because, unfortunately, he wore the green of the Tampa Bay Devil during that time period. He was good enough to eventually be sought after by the LA Dodgers, but that's another conversation for another day. So getting back to Don Mattingly, he was in the top 10, everything that you have. And this also kind of brings back the conversation. One of the issues I also have with the gentlemen that have steroids overshadowing them is they're also kind of ruining the chances of Dale Murphy for Don Mattingly to really get a fair handshake at getting in the Hall. Because we have to have this conversation. I mean, for Pete's sake, we spent, 35 minutes talking about these guys?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and as we should, but we're not talking about baseball. We're not talking about, all these things. We're talking about the reasons why they shouldn't. Not the fact that we're all in agreement that they were fantastic. We're all in agreement that they were awesome. But, ... That ellipsis from hell, it comes out, ... So now here we are having this conversation, and we're not really focusing on what made them great during their era. So Don Mattingly is kind of the antithesis of that. In the 80s, I was for years not on Don Mattingly in the Hall of Fame. I thought he was the Hall of Good, not the Hall of Great. But then doing this project this year, literally up till this month, I started realizing the same thing we talked about Jim Rice. I was livid when he got in. I'm like, no, there's no reason Jim Rice, he had a couple good seasons, blah, blah, blah. No, I was livid when he got in, but when I started breaking down, from 1975 to 1984, he was one of the top in the top 10 in many, many tiers, and it's overlooked. Unfortunately, you take a look at it. I challenge you guys. You stat muse, use what you want, but Jim Rice is there, and same thing with Don Mattingly. So, I hope that he gets in. I think that he's deserving. I do think that, again, he was an icon of the 80s. So, yeah.
You got Murphy, Mattingly. So your number 3 is who? Valenzuela?
Yes, sir. It is Fernando Valenzuela.
I knew I let Jeremy. Go ahead and tell us why Valenzuela. And we hadn't talked about this, have we, guys? So
no. So again, my philosophy is how I took about it was a very clinical way. Is okay. When was your era? Venezuela was in the 80s. So take a look at the 80s. Does he stack up? Where does he stack up? Do I see his name continually on the list? And the answer is yes. So you can say Fernando Mattingly all you want. You can even go to, well, he was journeyman at the end of his career, so on and so forth. The thing that Fernando Valenzuela did do is he was good. He was very good for many years in the 80s, and to the point where he is in the top 10s. I believe in not strikeouts because he had that sinker ball, so he got a lot of induced strikeouts. So check out his whip, check out his wins, check out the innings pitch, check out the batter's face. He was getting the ball and he was facing the guys. He was doing what he needed to do. He is top 10 of that era. So, and if you want to add in terms of how he helped the game, he really did bring a shine to Mexican League baseball players. He did what Hideo Nomo did in the 90s for Mexican baseball players. So I really think in terms of just making an impact on the game, in terms of what he did on the field, he's a Hall of Famer. You can disagree all you want. He's not first ballot, no, but he absolutely deserves to have a shrine there in the Hall of Fame.
You're good in the numbers, and I guarantee you, since I'm the old guy on the crew, you're good in the numbers. You can look this up, not only for Mexican, for Latino pitchers. The Latino pitching market really took off, and because there was a racial component that was going on with certain ethnicities that what they could do in all sports. And when Fernando come out, everybody was looking for the next Latino pitcher who had a little spunk. Everybody remembers Louis Tiant and how great, but the rest of the country, because now media is getting bigger, and because he pitched in LA, and I guarantee if you look at the numbers, the number of Latino pitchers skyrocketed at the moment. And now when you look on these major league rosters, I would say arguably it's over 50% are Latino pitchers, and they throw hard. They got a spunk to them. They got an attitude with them, and they're really fun to watch. And they don't put up with what. And as a former pitching coach, I love to watch. I'm a big Pedro guy. I love to watch Pedro and and stuff. So I think you make a good argument for now. He was not. I wouldn't want my 3. We pick 3. But I understand why you would pick Fernando. He was tremendous. I got to see him because I'm the old guy again. I got to see him live, and he was tremendous. He was a tremendous pitcher and fun to watch.
I saw him at the tail end of the career when he was with the Baltimore Orioles, so on and so forth. And, he was still very strong in terms of being able to place the ball with the movement and things like that. And, I think highly of him. Now, I'll be honest with you. Again, this was a situation where up until this month, I would have said no on Fernando. I would have said no on Fernando. I would have said, he was all about the hype. He was in the 80s, so on and so forth. Fernando Mania. Hey, if you want a mascot, then have a dedicated wing to mascots of Major League Baseball, and have all the great shiny guys, who are personalities there in the Hall of Fame. And Fernando, no, he could pitch, and he could pitch very well. He could pitch on high leverages. Take a look at his splits in the 80s specifically. I implore you guys, please put in the comments field. Tell me I'm full of whatever. That's cool. I'm down with it. But yeah, I changed my opinion. I had my guys picked up that I thought for a fact that Dale Murphy was here, and two guys, I'm like 100% these guys are going to be in. Fernando and Don Mattingly weren't there. But because I did the work, put in the effort to really realize why these guys were good, I took away their uniforms. I took away their big markets. And I just looked at what exactly they did. They're darn good.
Well, the thing to remember on Fernando too, the reason his career was able to go down as fast as it did, he threw the hardest pitch to throw in baseball, through the screwball. But he's turning his arm like this, which you're just going to lose velocity. So he lost his velocity on the fastball. And he threw slower. You saw it as Kershaw went on that big loopy curveball. Yeah. It took his velocity away. When you put that much stress on the arm, and you're right, he still threw admirably with the Orioles. So he was definitely one of the greatest players to ever play. Again, he was not one of my three, but I can understand the argument for it.
Yeah. I think when we look at this ballot, this is a ballot where there's a case for every single one of these guys to be in the Hall of Fame. I think that there's not really we're arguing the fringes here, right? In my opinion, with all of these guys, they, in my opinion, all deserve to be in. There's a case for all of them, in my opinion. So I think that it's very interesting how our picks have all kind of shaken out. So, Coach, who's your last pick?
My last pick is the one guy that I knew y'all wouldn't mention, and to me, it's the no-brainer of the 8, because also I think the Hall of Fame should be the greatest at your position. Not only one of the greatest players of your era, but one of the greatest players at your position. And this guy arguably is one of the greatest players position. And why he's not in the Hall of Fame is because, I hope I can say this word on here, he was an asshole, and the media didn't like him, and so did Barry Bonds not like him, and that's Jeff Kent. Jeff Kent's one of the greatest second basemen we ever seen to play the game. And I love Ryan Sandberg. I got to meet Ryan Sandberg. He's one of the nicest men, and, God, rest his soul. Yeah. And it's sad. And he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame too. But Jeff Kent was a better player than Ryan Sandberg. Jeff Kent's one of the greatest second basemen ever to play. You could all make it in the case, other than Rogers Hornsby, what he meant to a team, like Hornsby did to the Cardinals. And it's a shame just because he was a jerk and didn't want to answer questions and still doesn't want to talk to anybody. Yeah. That's the reason we're going to hold him out of the Hall of Fame. And that's the reason I got a little pushback to Roman with the abrasive part. That should have nothing to do with being in the Hall of Fame. And I love Jeremy bringing up Ty Cobb, who we consider one of the greatest hitters of all time. Ty Cobb is my grandfather. Sick brag for me here. We had a sick brag before we got on air, but a sick brag for me here that my grandfather played his first year with the Tigers. Was Ty Cobb's last year with the Tigers. And he said, and my grandfather, who never cussed, the only thing, but you say Ty Cobb, and he said, that son of a bitch. And that tells you a little bit. And my grandfather is one of the best men that ever walked this earth. He's, of course, passed too. But he's in the Hall of Fame. So Jeff Kent, you put his numbers up. Go back, don't even just put his era. Go back to all second basemen ever played the game. And the guy that I see that's comparable that we see right now playing, now it looks like he's going to be going to the outfield because his body's given up, is Jose Altuve. And is he going to get the same scrutiny because of the scandal that they had? Yeah. And, the microphone and all that stuff. It's going to be interesting. But again, as he's proven since all of that, Jose Altuve is one of the greatest hitters we've seen too at his position. And so when I made my list, Jeff Kent was one. Dale Murphy, because I'm a Braves guy, number 2. And then Roger Clemens, to me, were, like I said, I can make a case for all 8 of them. But if Jeff Kent doesn't get in, it's going to be purely on nobody likes him. And that's sad. That's what our Hall of Fame comes down to, is who we like, because it shouldn't be who we like. It should be who the best players are in Major League Baseball in the history of this game. And Jeff Kent should be in the Hall of Fame. That's my argument. Y'all can throw me on the bus, but that's how I feel about it.
Listen, when I was putting together my my official unofficial ballots every year, Jeff Kent was always on my list as well. I think that it is criminally overlooked the fact that he hasn't already been in. Again, like you said, Coach, one of the best second basemen in the history of baseball, not even just during his era, but in the entire history of baseball. There's a case for him right behind Roger Hornsby as the greatest of all time at that position. So definitely understand. And I also think it'd be really hilarious if both Bonds and Kent get elected on the same year, having to be on the at the same time. That would just be poetic justice, in my opinion. But Roman, you were going to say something.
Have two different ceremonies.
So with Jeff Kent, Coach, first and foremost, I respect the high hell of you, and I respect you. I respect your opinion. Before doing any sort of deep dives, I agreed he passed the sniff test to me in terms of his clutch hitting, in terms of his fielding, in terms of the type of grit and ball player that you have. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with having someone be a backside orifice, if you will. I'm completely okay with that. As long as you bring the goods to the field. Okay. Milton Bradley, case in point, was a backside orifice, but he brought a lot of controversy to the field. Niger Morgan, I believe is his name, the center fielder. For better or worse, he brought more than just focus on his play to the field. And with Jeff Kent, I thought, yeah, but when doing a deep dive, he's not there. Now hear me out, Coach, hold on. So when you look at his era, when you look at the 90s, yeah, granted, in Toronto, he was, let me backtrack. Jeff Kent's an anomaly because if you look at his overall totals of numbers, he kind of has that sniff test because he's got a 55 WAR, which is a borderline number. He's career 290s, so on and so forth. On base, OBP is 356, career slugging is 500, so on and so forth. So he has an OPS, which is 855. Fantastic. OPS plus is 123, career. Just on the surface, yeah. But if you take a look and crack the numbers down, that's really carried on by 3 major years. And granted, those were fantastic years. But when you put that into his era, if we crack down top 10 players in 1990, 1999, he doesn't make it. If you do 2000, 2009, he doesn't make it. I think he reaches top 10 in one category. I want to say that's like on base, so on and so forth. I expect his name to be littered there, or at least somewhere where you continually saw that. Mark Race, who is now in the Hall of Fame, is continually in that era in the 90s where you see his name continually, and he's not there. So just for an FYI, and that's another guy who should be in the Hall of Fame, but that's another conversation for another day. But when Jeff Kent, when you look at his numbers, yeah, he has great all overall on numbers, but when you take a look in terms of where he's at for the eras, he's not there. And Coach, with all due respect, because I thought the same thing, I'm like, certainly, because I just put top 10, top 15 second baseman for categories, he's not there, Coach.
Really, the park adjusted is what you're missing up on. Elmstead Park was one of the toughest ballparks to hit in baseball. And
Coach, I've been to games there. Yeah, my dad was stationed over in Fort Ord. Yeah,
you realize, yeah. And also, it says a lot that I don't think anybody watching this broadcast about looking it up can say anybody that batted behind him. Not one person that you could, one player. You go through the list of people who batted behind Jeff Kent.
Yeah,
it's pretty brutal. It's guys like in the league for 1 year out, guys who batted whatever, and I would say, and again, I don't want to hear how he's compared to Mark Grace or even Don Mattingly in this case. They should not be lined up. I'm comparing him to the other second baseman, and I made you the case.
Yeah.
Ryan Sandberg is in the Hall of Fame. Jeff Kent's not in the Hall of Fame. Do those side by side. And when you do those side by side, you realize Ryan Sandberg's in because he was a great guy. Mr. Cubby. He was Mr. Cub number 2 behind Ernie Banks. He always did. And Jeff Kent's not because he was Mr. Jerk. And he played in San Francisco. And I understand, and I respect that. I respect that. If you were to get a deep dive into the numbers, and I told him, and this is so funny we got to this because I told my boy, he's in the room here. He's watching a movie on his thing. But I told him, I said, I'm gonna get such pushback on Jeff Kent. It's gonna come from Roman because Roman's an analytics, just the numbers. And I understand, and that's the reason why we begin the show is you have to look at all views because Roman brings a great piece on why he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. He's looking at it from an analytics and the numbers, and I think that's great. I'm looking at it from a coach, a guy who plays every day, plays hard, wants to win more than he wants to live. He has the same demeanor as Matt Chapman. Hopefully, Tony Vitello, his energy will change the ball club, and that's what they're looking for. The next Matt Chapman, what do they always say? He doesn't smile. He don't ever look happy. They got the same kind of persona, but But that's the reason why I think we ought to have all kind of views, because I can see from analytics, you sell the point why wouldn't be on the list. He wouldn't make it. But he's not here. Is Jeremy's point. The only reason he's here, and this 8 votes, and not already in the Hall of Fame, was because he was a jerk. He should have already been voted in. He should not even been here. And he's here. Look, I'm a huge Dale Murphy fan.
Yeah.
I have his jersey. He walks by me at the games. We know him. He's around the stadium all the time. He comes to almost every home game he can. But he's not there because when he went to Philadelphia and Colorado, he was bad.
Yeah.
He was bad at the end of his career. And his numbers, he didn't quite get to those numbers he wanted to. But in a short period, he produced. So that's the reason why I think Jeff Kent, if I was on this committee, I realized here's a guy who slipped to me and really had no reason to slip to me. Everybody else on the list, I can see why they slipped to me.
Yeah.
They slumped at the end, they have controversy, whatever. But this guy slipped to me just because the writers didn't like him. And that's the reason why I put him on the list. And if y'all don't vote for him, I understand why, but that's the reason I put him on the list.
So just to pull up that comparison that you said, Coach, between Jeff Kent and Ryan Sandberg for their careers, you see just how much in these categories here, Jeff Kent dominated the field in terms of he and Sandberg in comparison. So very interesting that, that's the comp, that you're alluding to. And it does show Jeff Kent as a Hall of Fame worthy player.
And again, Coach, I 100% agree. And I like to think of myself, it's funny. I like to think of myself as not an analytics guy. I think I'm a hybrid guy because I can see the stats and I can see, but I also want the guy who hustles. I want the guy who runs out the ball. I want the guy who covers. I want the guy who does the little fundamental things, so on and so forth. I would rather take that guy. And that's probably one of the reasons why I love the race is because we do the annoying things, the gritty things consistently. I feel. So
well, you described Jeff Kent. He played hard all the time.
And I agree. I agree. But here's the thing. It's called the Hall of Fame. And at the end of the day, it's called the Hall of Fame. And in terms of, I've just provided multiple ways where he's not standing out, just being top of his era. Okay, I'm not talking about anything else. Whereas I've used the same argument to justify Dale Murphy. He was the top of his era. I was using the same argument to justify Don Mattingly. Unfortunately, and Fernando, same thing. When it comes to Jeff Kent, I agree with you. To see, if he gets in, I completely understand why. In terms of him being brash and things like that, I don't have an issue because you're not bringing a dark shroud. There's certain ways to go about it. You don't want to have an interview, that's fine. You get annoyed a little bit, so on and so forth. I completely get it. No problem. I survived the Pat Burrell era of the Tampa Bay Devil Rays or the Rays. God bless them. That's a conversation for another drink other than coffee, guys. Just saying. But
can I ask you a question?
Please.
Which second baseman are you referring to being greater than Jeff Kent during his era? Who is it? Who's you referring to? When you say Jeff Kent wasn't the best at his era, see again, I don't look at across the board. I don't judge Dale Murphy against Mike Schmidt. Okay, I'm not judging that because it's two totally different. It's just the coach in me coming. I look at different positions. We had this argument, remember, with Cal Raleigh and Aaron Judge. I look at them compared to their position. When I look at Dale Murphy amongst the other center fielders, the Gary Maddoxes and all that played center field at the time in the 80s, Willie McGee and all that stuff like that. That's what I'm judging. So who is the second baseman you're referring to was that Jeff Kent couldn't match up to during his era?
So, Coach, just point of clarification. I think you got two different sections. Let me clarify if I may. When I'm saying era, I'm talking about the top hitters in that era, so on and so forth, top 10. When I'm talking about if you put the second baseman all together, okay? So if you put career leaders for hits, career leaders for on-base percentage, so on and so forth. If you do that for second baseman, you go a long ways until you see Jeff Kent.
And go longer until you see Ryan Sandberg.
So, Coach, I'll get back to you. I'll circle back on that one. No. These are great conversations because I want to be challenged, man. Okay, I don't want to be the emperor wearing the invisible cloak. Because it can be cold sometimes. You guys can fill in that joke wherever you want. That's on you. But no, it's just I want to make sure that I'm thinking because echo chambers are bad. I want to be challenged. So You know, and Coach, once upon a time, I didn't give anybody who was into sabermetrics. I thought sabermetrics was some sort of like thing that you would find, you know, in a couples counseling. You know, hey, he was down with sabermetrics, and that's where I had to draw the line. You know, I mean, I really thought it was this bad thing, and then I started realizing some of the physics behind it, and I started getting down with it. I'm like, okay, I can see that. Okay, launch velocity, I don't agree with it. You know, just hit. You know, I still think that the shift should not be outlawed. Adjust to the damn pitch. Sorry, see what he's doing. He's giving me curse. Shame on you, Jay. But anyway, so Jeff Kent, that's your vote. That's your choice, 100%. If he ends up getting the Hall of Fame, I'm not going, but I can see it. I can see it. There's other guys that I would go, really, that guy's in the Hall of Fame? Okay, well, fine. He made it. You know, good for him. High five. But Jeff Kent, I can see it. It's just, to me, when we're talking about these 8 guys, now there's one more guy who is even lower than Jeff Kent, in my opinion. You know, there's, you know, easily of these 8 gentlemen, in my opinion, you know, you got 6 slam dunks, in my opinion, and you start nicking, you know, hey, why is this guy so on and so forth, all that, like you said, the fringes. But, you know, Jeff Kent, I can make an argument, and it was surprising that I can make an argument against him. I thought I couldn't, but I can't. So, but that's another conversation for another day. We can have a back and forth by all means. But all right, Jeremy, what do you got for your third, sir?
All right, so my last selection, and this really was another player for me that I feel like was an absolute travesty that hasn't gotten in, and another player that I feel like part of it was because the writers didn't like him, but it's Gary Sheffield. When you look at Gary Sheffield and you look at his numbers and what he was capable of doing, he was a feared hitter for a very long time. And this was a guy who hit 3rd, 4th, or 5th in every single lineup he ever played in. This was a guy who has over 500 home runs, over 250 stolen bases, and had a career batting average over 290 for his career. There's only 6 players in Major League Baseball history that meet that criteria, and the other 5 outside of Gary Sheffield are already in the Hall of Fame. So for me, Gary Sheffield is a guy that, no doubt about it, for me, deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He belongs in the Hall of Fame, much like my other 2 candidates. And realistically, the same 3 candidates that both of you gentlemen mentioned as well. For me, all of these guys have a legitimate case to be in the Hall.
Gary Sheffield would have been number 4 for me. If anything, I see Gary, of course, in Atlanta. Our best offensive team we ever had was with Gary Sheffield in it, and even better than probably the 2023 team that hit all the home runs. They were better offensively. Yeah, if y'all remember that team, that's the team that Eric Gregg decided to take the playoffs away from us. And a pivotal Game 5 against Florida. He did. No, Game 5 is where Eric Gregg called every pitch in the other batter's box a strike. Levon Hernandez. Levon Hernandez, and basically just took the bat out of her hand. Because he knew, but
Question earlier, most controversial calls, and something that we're working on for later. But yeah, that was one of the ones that stuck out in my head.
Yeah, that's definitely. To me, it's probably the most controversial because he literally nobody really to this day. Of course, the rest is so he's gone now. He'll never be able to explain why he decided that game the Braves were not going to hit the ball that game. And but Gary Sheffield, get back to him. I don't know why he's on this committee. I don't know why he's in this committee vote. We went back. Him and Ken are the 2 guys, and I don't know why Jeff's getting thrown under the bus here so much. There's only one guy on the list I didn't think deserved to even be on this date, and that's the one guy we didn't say.
Yeah,
that's the only guy. The other 7, you make an argument. I can believe in all the other 7. And if you vote for any of the other 7, I have got nothing to say to fight against it. I can tell you maybe why I picked this guy over them, and I think that's what we're doing tonight. The only one that should not be even considered, I guess, because they just had to have 8. I don't know. Is Carlos Delgado. Carlos Delgado is not a Hall of Famer. Let's get over it, Toronto. He's not. He's a Hall of a very good. Okay, when you end up being the 3rd or 4th best first baseman ever to play for a franchise, and a franchise that short, you're probably not a Hall of Fame. They've got a guy now, if he continues on the pace he is, maybe he could be a Hall of Famer. We know Fred McGriff is a Hall of Famer. And I'd make a case that John Olerud is better than Carlos Delgado. And that's as like Roman likes to say, that's an argument for another day. But the other 7, you can definitely pick. And I'd have no problem with Gary Sheffield. Part of me wants Gary Sheffield to be on this vote. And as a Braves fan, I would love to have Gary Sheffield and Dale Murphy go in the same year. I'm sure Gary would probably wear Yankees or whatever he wants to wear. That's fine. Dale would definitely wear a Braves. I doubt he would wear a Rockies jersey, but that'd be kind of funny. But I 100% agree with you, Jeremy. Gary Sheffield definitely deserving to be in the Hall of Fame.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and have this conversation. For the record, what Gary Sheffield has done in the Tampa area, him and Dwight Gooden were on a pretty remarkable Little League team, which is in a area, if you go there, it's the vast majority of African Americans living there. I've had the the luxury of meeting Gary Sheffield multiple times, but I was working coach, being a waiter and bartender. So, good dude. I respect him, just a down-to-earth guy. In terms of what he's doing nowadays, he's kind of softened up a little bit in terms of how he's, doing the media circuits and things like that. People are kind of embracing the fact that he's kind of the crusty uncle, who smokes a cigar and jacks home runs over Little League ballpark with that same swagger to him. I have nothing but respect for him. However, unlike the other guys, he did admit to doing illegal substances. He did it. Now, granted, he goes, I just did a cream. I didn't know what was in it, and I got it from Barry Bonds. So, I was working out with Barry Bonds, and I got the cream. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was, and that made me come up on the report and made me spike. So, for better or worse, again, I talked about earlier, 5 hours ago when we first started this, I talked about earlier that, hey, this is kind of like, gangsters, if you will, and kind of the same thing if you guys bounce with me on this one. In terms of the numbers, again, can't argue with it. In terms of what he produced, I mean, him as a Padre, he was amazing. Him as a Marlin, awesome. At the time period, I was rooting for the Marlins because I got to finally have an expansion team that I could grow with. My team was the Pirates. I switched to the Marlins. I was 12 years old, 10 years old. Awesome, no problem. And they had really cool colors, so I liked it. So, but to see Gary Sheffield playing there, it was awesome. At one point, true story, Gary Sheffield almost signed with the Rays. He had a dinner with Joe Madden. There were some talks, just like with Kenny Lofton almost coming to the Rays. The numbers weren't there, and he ended up finishing his career, I believe, in the Mets is where he ended up going, and that's fine. But I have nothing but respect for Gary Sheffield, but because unlike the other guys where we can speculate whether or not they did what they did, no, I can prove that. So that was an illegal substance, and he admitted to that. Now, the Pete Rose rule that I touched on earlier, he at least owned up to it. So I'm a little bit easier to go on. If we're going to let somebody in who admitted to it, sure, I'm good with that. I'm all right with that. Rather than, again, playing this hat game, if you will, the shell game, where it's like, hey, nope, you almost, nope, you guess wrong. That's what it feels like a lot with these controversies, where it's like we can pretty much pin it. It's like playing Clue, sorry, where it's like, all right, yeah, I know who killed him, but I don't know where. Okay, maybe it was in the lobby, or maybe it was in the study, the parlor. What is a parlor? I don't know, but he did it, right? No, come on. And that's what it feels like talking about, these controversies. Like, nope, he didn't do it, man. Come on. Oh, heavens to Betsy. But anyway, so to digress, Gary Sheffield, I respect him. He was an underrated ball player. To see his career where he came up with the Brewers, he was shortstop, failed shortstop, third baseman. He was an okay third baseman. He really thrived when he moved to the outfield. I wish him the best, sincerely. And if he gets in, I would be okay with that because, again, he's got the numbers and he has the attrition. Period. He owned up to it. And that's all I'm asking for, is just to be upfront. Don't be like Pete Rose, where it's like, oh no, and I didn't do it. No, yeah, I did it. Here's what I did. Here's exactly what I did. I screwed up. My bad. Own up to it, and everyone will move on. So that's my thought.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think that's true. I know we don't have much time, but we all give the reasons, and now we really pretty much know. Give everybody a shot, and hopefully they'll tell us, how wrong, how right we are. And I look forward to that. But at the end of the day, who do we think this committee is going to vote in? We just gave all the reasons they will. So who do you think this committee? Yeah, we know this. Which three do you think that we're going to hear out of it?
I don't think we get.
Go ahead, Jay.
I don't think we get 3 out of this committee. I think in order to get inducted, you have to have 12 out of the 16 votes. And as you saw, just in our little 3-man crew, there was an overlap of just 2 players. Outside of that, we all voted differently.
And that's the 2 I think's getting in. I think Murphy and Mattingly's getting in. Mattingly, because of all the stuff that went around with the Blue Jays in retiring, I think it's a good field story. And there's nobody can say a bad word about Dale Murphy.
Oh, yeah.
And he's one of the oldest of the group. And of course, there's a little bit of Braves, I know, in my heart. But I think that's the 2. I think that's the 2 that come in. I agree with you. I don't think he gets to 3. I think the 2. We just showed why, and it maybe even be 1. But I think the 2 that's got the best shot are Don Mattingly and Dale Murphy.
I agree.
It wouldn't surprise me if either Bonds or Clemens gets in. It would not surprise me because here's the thing about Clemens. He got 64% of the vote. Okay, he was at least close, and I don't think Bonds ever got that point. But Clemens at least got.
There
Oh,
were,
was
there
it?
were always, yeah, Bonds and Clemens were always like right there, up within a point of one another.
Yeah,
But I think
Go
what's
ahead, Jerry.
them both not get in, and we saw this the last time this particular contemporary era committee was happening. The players, the former players that are in that room, did not vote for them, and I think that's what's going to hold back Bonds and Clemens. And I think, to Coach's point, I think the guys that are going to get in are going to be, those guys that were beloved by their fellow players, that were also obviously the guys, that we mentioned on this list, have the numbers, have the case there to be able to be a part of it. We mentioned the seven out of the eight, between the three of us. So I think those guys do have their cases, in terms of the numbers, but I think it's going to be that extra factor that is, that X factor, if you will, is what puts them over the top. And I agree with Coach. I think that it is going to be, Mattingly and Murphy that are going to be the guys that if there's going to be anybody, voted in by this committee, I think those guys have the best shot.
I agree with you. I think it's because of the players. I think the players will lump Clemens and Bonds in. They don't like them because of the steroid use, and they don't like Gary and Jeff because they were abrasive. Here's stories. Even you talked about us three love Gary, but we know that he softened up. But you hear clubhouse stories where he'd walk into clubhouses and basically didn't want to hear anything because he had a headache and made everybody be quiet and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think he doesn't. I think with Delgado and Valenzuela, I don't think that they meet in the players' eyes. They can see maybe a flash a little bit with Fernando and Delgado. I think they see what we see, maybe not great of the great. And so it leaves them with two, I think, has the best chance in Mattingly and Murphy getting in. And I wouldn't be shocked if Bonds or Clemens gets in. If it does, to Roman's point, I don't know if a floodgates, but it then will change everything here going forward if they nominate one of them. And I'm not sure we're ready for that yet. So I think it will be, again, Mattingly and Murphy that has the shot.
I mean, as time goes by, that harsh line is getting less and less. It's getting more faded. It's getting softer. Now, can I say a couple things about Carlos Delgado, if I may?
All right, go ahead.
All right. So, when doing a dive on Carlos Delgado, if you take a look at it, he really had one elite season, and that was 2000. He was elite during that time period. He was still very good every other season. When you take a look at his peripherals, I think he was 472 home runs. The mythical 500 home run barrier. He's close. So, you start to have that Fred McGriff conversation. Well, he had strike season. Granted, he was a rookie, but you could make that argument. 280, he has some very interesting numbers. Now, I was thinking, because after taking a look at that, I was doing deep dive in 1990 through 1999. He wasn't on the list. 2000 to 2009, he wasn't on the top 10 in any category for average, for on-base percentage, for hits. He wasn't there. So I was trying to figure out, and I was doing cross sections. So 98 to 2001 or 2003, he wasn't there in the top 10. So then finally I went to 2000, 2001. And then you would see him, but again, very low on the list, top 10 in this, maybe top 7 in this. So you had to do a cross reference to really find him to be elite in his category. There's the controversy of, he was one of the greatest Puerto Ricans of all time. 100% agree, no doubt. No doubt, 100% agree. But just because of that, if you want to put him in the Hall of Fame because he's a representation of Puerto Rican baseball, then let's just make that stipulation on that. I can get behind that and I can respect that. But Carlos Delgado, during his heyday of 98 through 2003, I don't know if he was the top 3 of the AL East, let alone in baseball. And with respect to Carlos Delgado, again, I like him. Carlos Delgado, ESPN and things like that. But during that era, he had Fred McGriff in Tampa Bay. You had Tino Martinez and Jason Giambi in New York. You had Mo Vaughn in Boston. And then I believe you had Rafael in Baltimore during that same era. And then you have Carlos Delgado.
Yeah.
So if we were to make a pick of if we had 5 first basemen, say we got to pick one of them, I don't know if we're going to choose Delgado any higher than 5th consistently.
Yeah, Delgado's not a Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Period.
I respect the high hell of them. I joked, the Louvre, everyone knows the Louvre. They used to have a section way back when of the hall, or it was the display of basically the rejections, where they would have like the not very good paintings, but there's still something to talk about. They had a section where you walk in before you see the masterpieces in the Louvre. And that's where you saw a lot of like the more contemporary stuff. That's where you saw the Impressionists and things like that. The Cubism was there, and people were kind of gawking at it and so, look at this guy, this Dutch guy, what's his name? Van Gogh? Van No. Yeah, that actually happened. Check me, you're welcome. There you go, art history, you're welcome, people. Yeah, there you go. Keep it tugged on baseball banter, you're welcome, people. But no, so I feel that you should have maybe the Hall of the not so bad. Or back to my point, they really need to divide the Hall into maybe guys that were good ambassadors of the game, maybe good ambassadors of the international game. And that's maybe where you're going to get Carlos Delgado.
I think it comes down to that's what the team we started the show with. That's what team Hall of Fames are for.
100%.
Team Hall of Fames are for all those things that mean to a community. They can retire any jersey for any reason, and they want to put them in their Hall of Fame. We have a huge Hall of Fame. We don't retire jerseys, and every year we put 2 or 3 great Braves in the Hall of Fame. Some of them are great broadcasters. Some of them are even great front office people. That's what team Hall of Fame. So this MLB Hall of Fame should be nothing but great players. And I don't care how nice Carlos Delgado is or anything like that, or what he means to the community. You know, Puerto Rico can put him in their National Hall of Fame or whatever they want to create. That's where those guys go.
I want to be at that party right there.
Oh, I would. That would be fun. You know, and one of my favorite players in the game is right now in the day is Puerto Rican. So I love, I love to watch what they bring to the game. It's awesome, but he does not deserve to be. If he's the one guy that gets on this list, then I know the Hall of Fame's a fraud.
So I think just to kind of kind of piggyback and kind of close this out on your point, Roman, that's what the museum part of the Hall of Fame is for, right?
Yeah.
You have these spots where you can feature different players for different reasons. Your point about kind of the mascots, the ambassadors of baseball, those good field guys. That's where you can see them featured in a section of the museum part. But for the Hall of Fame, it should be exactly that. These should be the players that captured their era, they captured their moment, during the height of their time, playing this wonderful, beautiful game that we love. And obviously, guys, as you can see, this conversation can go on all night long. There's no doubt that we could sit here for another 3 hours arguing the cases that we've already done, but we want to hear from you. We want to know down in the comment section below who you would vote for with your 3-pick opportunity. Who would make your Hall of Fame ballot in this upcoming season off of this 8-man crew? It's been a fun conversation having Coach and Roman here to discuss this. But again, we can't do this without your involvement and your engagement. So let us know down in the comments. And while you're down there, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, as it does truly help us continue to build and grow this baseball community here on the Baseball Banter broadcast. And if you're not seeing the kind of coverage that you want from your teams, then reach out. There may be a place for you to join us here to be able to have these discussions on an ongoing basis. Because as you can tell, we love the banter here at the Baseball Banter broadcast. So for Coach Ken and Roman, I'm Jeremy, and we'll catch you guys on the next video. Peace.